Welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Normand, your host. We're with a young legend, if that's not an oxymoron, but certainly head coach at Jacksonville University, John Galloway. John, one of the finest goalies to probably come out in the last 10 years, and you've been now at Jacksonville for 6 years. So first of all, thanks for taking the time. It's pretty warm down where you are in Florida, so appreciate you taking a couple seconds, and welcome aboard.
No, thank you for having me. I love joining these calls, and so cool to see how much it's growing in different areas and folks like you. And we have a gentleman who does something similar in North Florida, and our programs are very lucky to have people like you be ambassadors for what we're doing.
Of all the questions I want to ask, this is the one I want to start with, and I don't know if it makes any sense. You're now at Jacksonville at 6 years, so that makes you start out. You had your head job at 27. Does that sound right?
Yeah, 27.
You had a public relations degree from Syracuse, and we'll get into the Central New York stuff. But does a 20-year-old John Galloway know that he knows obviously that you can't make a lot of money at professional lacrosse at the time because the MLL wasn't paying the money they're paying with the PLL. So does a public relations director know he wants to be his coach at some point? Was that part of the plan?
No, I had no idea even after I graduated. I had the fortune of working at camp the summer after I graduated and met Coach Janowski. And we had lunch at the St. Andrews School down here in Florida. And we just got to talking and talking lacrosse and talking shop. And he said, "Hey, I have a volunteer position if you're interested." And gosh, maybe 3 weeks later, I packed up my car in Syracuse, New York, and drove to Durham. And it was the best decision I ever made with the best mentor I could ask for.
Was that just by coincidence? Or, I mean, you come out with a great university with a public relations degree. So what was before that from an employment standpoint?
Yeah, I had a dream to do broadcast journalism. That's why I went to Syracuse for. I was in the Newhouse School, and it was obviously, one of the best communications programs in the country. I transitioned to PR later on and had an internship with the Yes Network in New York, and got my feet wet there, and ultimately just didn't feel that hunger in my belly for what I was doing. And I was taking that summer to kind of navigate what I wanted to do while playing in the MLL for the first time. And again, just stumbled on a summer camp. Casey Powell was running it, and Coach Janowski was down there for the day. And again, it was that lunch in that cafeteria that really kind of set me on a new course.
It's an interesting thread with all of the coaches we've interviewed. It's amazing how many different stories there are, how they got to coaching. And obviously, if we're interviewing them for us for this show, they've had some success. So it is literally as different. And I don't think anybody has said, when I was 15, I wanted to be a coach, and that's the way it always was. There was some incident or some episode in their life, some opportunity in their life that changed it. And from being from the central New York area, that every town has one or two guys that sort of the guy that picked up the stick, and I'm sure that's true for football and basketball and everything else. So let me take you. We'll talk about ASUN in a little bit, but let me take you back to you went to West Jenny. I don't know of much more of a hallmark than there's actually a drill named after a high school. So
I know
environment means everything. If you grow up in the mountains, you're probably not going to be. You're probably going to be a ski racer. So the environmental part is you grew up in West Jenny, you grew up in Central New York, which is certainly a hotbed and has been for at least 30 or 40 years. So you got an early start. How did it start for you?
Well, I was fortunate enough to have an older brother that was a part of the program and went to the state championship in 1997. And to me, that was the NFL. Going to West Tennessee games Tuesday and Friday nights under the lights was like going to an NFL game and a kid in Camillus. And, I developed a hunger to be a part of that program. Like, I didn't dream about playing at Syracuse or playing in the MLL. I dreamt about playing for Coach Masser and Coach Deegan. And funny enough, even when I was in high school, I wouldn't go on the varsity field in gym class until I made the varsity team. I told the gym teacher, I said, "Listen, I can't go on that field until I'm on the varsity team. That field is sacred." And for me, it was like this like a rite of passage to be able to play for that coaching staff and that program. And it starts in elementary, where you're playing at Show Park, and then middle school, I played for Tom Donahue, and Kevin Donahue was my science teacher who ended up being my college coach. And I mean, you are bred from early on in your career about how to act, how to carry yourself on and off the field, what is required of you to be a Western Steel lacrosse player. And I'm a heck of a lot better because of that experience.
In Central New York, we've talked to Cortland guys and Potsdam guys, and one of the things that really is true is there's an obligation for college guys to come back and work with the high school kids. It's sort of a circle that comes back to it, and that's been inbred for some of the guys I've talked to. Bill Tierney talks about what it was like, on Long Island, same kind of thing. It was just that sort of New York approach to things. So it is giving back. It is part of that. And if your summer coach happens to be a John Galloway, who's a 2-time All-American, you're going to learn some things. So that certainly had, I think, a strong hand in your process as well.
Yeah, I think the Shove Park process is developed to make sure that you stay involved in the game within the program. And that means alumni, you're working with your high school coaches, even if you're a seventh and eighth grader. So you're getting the same, vernacular and verbiage that the best guys are doing it. And then you're watching these guys, to your point, come back with Albany helmets and Cortland helmets. I remember the Cortland guys they were hot that time in my career, and they came back, and then you play against them. So at Shove Park, you play as a ninth grader against a college kid, and you got your butts kicked. But that was like, okay, this is what it takes. This is what I want to be a part of. And it was incredibly motivating every summer. That was like the season for us as well.
The guys from West Jenny realized locally what that name means away from the area.
I don't know. I don't think growing up, for sure, I don't think that was the experience. But I think now that you're on the outside looking in and looking at different programs and now programs growing here in the youth, and you see so many people copying the model that Coach Masser put together, now you understand how lucky we were to have that advantage as young kids.
Why goalie?
Younger brother, that's
Okay.
probably the normal answer. I had an older brother. He was on the team. They were 10 years older than me. So it was, hey, we got to get somebody to get in the net. And I fell in love with it. I mean, it was, my parents tried to convince me something else, but there was something about it. I love to play outside of the cage too. It's where I developed my skill work. But it was, I was addicted to it right off the gate.
You hold the opinion that being a goaltender, certainly at a higher level, in my era, the fat kid went in the net, both hockey and goalie and box lacrosse, because he was the kid that couldn't run, and I was that kid. So do you think goalie is a much more, it needs more than just the fat kid in the net. It's the athlete. And I think special kind of kid, because it's leadership. It's having projectiles coming at you at high speed. Not everybody can play in the goal. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think our sport, every shape, every different type of athlete can play in some position. There's big attackmen, there's big defensemen. The misnomer that goalies have to be the unathletic guy, the guy that, maybe wouldn't make the team if he didn't play goalie. I couldn't disagree with that more. The hand-eye coordination, the level of confidence, the intangibles, the leadership, the mental toughness, the mental, withstanding of struggling, having good games versus having bad games. I mean, there's so much that goes into it outside of just the physical attributes. So I'm a huge, a naysayer of that thought process that, the lesser has to go into the net.
What do you go to clinics? What do you tell young goalies? What's the one caveat that if they walked away from a clinic with you, what would they know?
Yeah. How do you differentiate yourself? I use this analogy all the time. The difference between the number one goalie in the country and the number 72 goalie in Division I is about 3 to 5 saves per game. That's what save percentage. That's a small gap in between being the best and quote unquote the worst. Well, how do you separate yourself with the coaching staff when you have 4 goalies or 5 goalies on the roster? How skilled are you? How do you lead? How do you command? What do you do when you're not making a save? Are you a playmaker behind the cage? Can you pick off passes? Are you a director in the clear? I mean, those are things that I just don't think get coached enough. And, for me, I was never the best ball stopper, and never on a team at Syracuse was I the best ball stopper. But it was the things I did outside of the net, the confidence that I think the coaches had in me, how I communicated, how I knew the defense, how I controlled the ball in the clearing game. Those are the things that, when you're looking at a practice, he made 50% of the saves, he made 48% of the saves, but when the ball's in his stick, we know the ball is going to end up on the offensive side of the field. So I think that's what I try to teach young kids is stopping the ball is great. Everybody's pretty good at it. You train a lot to do that, but what else are you doing to differentiate yourself?
Heard a lot of statements, and I'm just briefly on goalie. Last one to win moves. You try to work with that with young goalies, and because the reality is a lot of young youth goalies try to play hockey, and if you got an 85% chance of scoring inside of 3 yards, you're going to get hit at that point. So get behind the stick, and the last guy to move wins. Does that sound like a sound theory to you?
It does. And I think there's different trains of thought. I think Blaze Riordan is a great example of a guy who's kind of changed the thought process of playing goalie and how he plays low angles, et cetera. But, the analogy we always use is take away high, assume low. There's too many goalies that I think squad and bait and do things outside of their purview. And essentially what shooters are taught, and I learned this from Kyle Harrison years ago, they're taught to see net. And when they see a lot of white, that takes away how much they're thinking, and it takes away that hitch in their ability to put the ball in a corner. And what I want to do is take away as much net as I can. I'm going to assume low, but I'm not going to give anything low. And that's a way for us to think posture and, what you look like in the net versus what you're doing. And I think that's just as important.
It's an interesting statement. You say that you don't think you're the best ball stopper at Syracuse, yet you're still a two-time All-American. That's nobody said
good defense.
I guess my point is it's really self-awareness of what you did well.
Yeah. I mean, I knew what my strengths were, and I knew what my weaknesses were, and I worked really hard to become a better ball stopper. But I knew that if we were going to be the best version of our team, I had to lead in different ways other than just stopping the ball. Because the kid from Syracuse right now, I didn't have his capacity. I never made 27 saves, but my job was to put us in a position where we were so organized I didn't have to, and I took a lot of pride in that. I mean, our manager had 3 CDs in my locker every time I walked in. I had all the games for the previous opponent and the next opponent. So I knew what was going to happen. And that was my way of staying ahead of maybe some of my deficiencies.
You win 2 national championships as a freshman and sophomore. Your high school goalie coach or whomever taught and coached you must have been extraordinary.
Yeah, Bob Deegan is one of the best. And I was very fortunate to work with a guy who cared so much about the position, studied it with me, stayed in contact with me when I was in college. And again, the common vernacular, I went from Bob Deegan, West Tennessee high school teacher, science teacher, to Kevin Donahue at Syracuse, West Tennessee middle school science teacher. So they kind of knew what I needed to work on, and I had a voice in my ear for 8 years essentially in a row.
The Syracuse Experience was sort of the tail end. You guys had great teams, won national championships. It sort of tailed off as you got closer to the end of the 10 decade from that standpoint. But the playing the Carrier Dome and being in that part of the world had to be a great experience.
It was amazing. And, I always look back on 2011 with a lot of regret because that was the best team we had. I will add the caveat that the shot clock wasn't there back in the day. And that was the game that happened when Maryland held the ball. But yeah, we had a heck of a team, a heck of experience. More importantly, a lot of friendships made. And that is just not just your teammates at a place like Syracuse, to be able to be friends with Paul Carcaterra and to be able to have conversations with Robbie Mulligan, whose poster was on my wall when I was growing up. Those are the types of things that I think separate that type of place. And that's what we're trying to build here as well.
There's a loyalty to Syracuse lacrosse, as there might have been with UCLA basketball. There might have been Ohio State football, other schools and those kinds of things. And I think it comes from the alumni who come back to do that, which is kind of what we had talked about earlier in this interview. Central New York, everybody has a very parochial view about their area. I've always made comments in this series about Long Island attackment, and guys from Central New York get angry because he says there's guys that obviously in Central New York that are just as good as Long Island, but it's the regionalism that makes the sport so terrific in New York, and unless you've lived there, it's hard to understand that, I think. Yeah,
I think the Empire State Games was a big part of that too. Growing up, is you had Long Island versus Central versus Western, and you got to meet the guys from Penn Yan and get to meet the guys from Cold Spring Harbor. But there's a rooted rivalry deep there, and I think everybody kind of points to Long Island, upstate Maryland, now a little bit of Philly, and now it's growing to a whole nother spectrum. But we took pride in, hey, we wanted Syracuse guys that were local guys, and we had a lot of local guys in my class, and I think it was a big part of why we were able to, because I think it fits with the university. That's the culture. Just like I'm sure Maryland has its own type of culture. And I think that was important to us.
I just curious, playing for Desco, what was that like?
Yeah, really unique. He didn't say much to me, which I think was, now looking back as a coach, I have great respect for, because I think he understood that the culture at Syracuse was, hey, the leaders lead, and the coach is there to lay the hammer when necessary. But he let us play, and that was kind of the culture. It's very different than West Tennessee. I always equate it's like the art and the science. At West Tennessee, it was a science. It was a certain way that we were going to play. It was the high socks. It was the discipline, the tight twos. At Syracuse, it was an art. It was a form of expression, and that took some getting used to for me. But Coach Desco did a hell of a job of letting us kind of make mistakes and not yelling at me. I think he yelled at me a very few handful of times. Could have yelled at me a heck of a lot more. But I think that was the beauty of him, is he kind of knew when to push and when to prod, but it was very rare. And I had Coach Donahue obviously in my ear throughout the entirety.
2006, the World Championships were in London, Ontario, and he was the coach of that national team that lost in pretty good convincing fashion when the Gate Boys took care of that fourth quarter. We had never we had just heard rumors about how he was. We had a chance to be on the sidelines for most of that series, and it was a hot week. It was like 95 degrees the whole week. And you saw him up close with his players. And until you see somebody up close, you really can't judge him other than what you've heard from the street. And I was amazed at the communication he had and the respect he had of his players. I thought that was really something when you get to see it up close. So he obviously was very successful, and now they got a guy there that isn't too bad either. So my follow up to this is that you get Petramala and Gary Gate at Syracuse. You have this great reputation as a superb player. Does being a better coach, being a better player, and having a name in the sport help you from a coaching perspective?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think it helps you from a recruiting perspective, a familiarity perspective. I mean, listen, if you walk into a room with Gary Gate and Dave Petramala and you have any knowledge of college lacrosse, you better be wowed. If you don't, you need to check tape. And I think that's important. That's important to have, we call it cultural equity. They probably have player equity in terms of what they've done in the sport. But I say this all the time, even with me as a coach, and what I did on the field doesn't matter to our guys. When I'm coaching, I need to be prepared. I need to understand the film. I need to understand the changes in our sport, which the game has evolved. So I think that's just as important too. And that's why I don't like to talk about my playing with our guys, because it's not beneficial. It's so different from what they're going through. And I think that there's a growth when you become a coach of what's behind the scenes that you have no idea what's involved when you're a player.
When you're an alumni of Syracuse and you see the juggernaut coaching staff they have and what potentially might be, the old days of Syracuse, being a Division I coach with an upcoming program in that top 25, are you supportive as an alumni, or are you semi-jealous as a competitor? And one of the first coaches you had that you hired down in Jacksonville was Casey Powell.
Yeah, I really don't. I'll be honest. My alumni status, I guess, is put on pause right now. I don't really follow Syracuse that much. My job is Jacksonville. I think we have a pretty damn good team. I'd love to play those guys. I think that for me, the focus is on what we're building down here. And again, I had a great experience. I'm here because of my experience there, but my focus is on our program and obviously what we're developing. And obviously wish those guys the best of luck, of course.
Yeah, no, it was just sometimes a question pops in your head.
Yeah.
College, you had this unbelievable career, national championships, player of the year, all the rest of those kind of things. Most people know your background. When you're coming out, now you want to go play in the MLL at this point. But for the most part, you still know that it's not a full-time gig unless you've got a lot of clinics and you've got some kind of backing from a local company like from Detroit Warrior. And what do you think of as when you're coming out with the talent you had? If you'd had the same talent as a football player, you're signing for seven figures. Is that a conversation you have with your parents coming out, knowing that you're trying to figure out what that works?
Yeah, I think when you're a college kid, you're, the first time I had to deal with Maverick or STX, and the first time you see a couple $1,000, you're excited. So, I think it's all, in perspective, it's all relational. And, of course we knew we weren't football, but we also knew that we've been playing for a lot and going to class, and now we're playing for a lot and we're making some money, and, we're working camps and we're getting paid. And, to us, it was like, who knew? I didn't have two nickels to rub together, but it was awesome. I mean, Joel White and I, my college roommate, we traveled all that summer. We went to a bunch of camps. We were making more money than we ever have. And, you didn't have many worries. So, looking back, it's like, man, how the heck did we pull that off, making, what was it, $6,500 a year in the MLL? But gosh, it was so much fun. And it was so important to my growth as a player too. I mean, I think about where I was year one to where I was at the end of my career. I was so much more mature, kind of knew what was coming, knew how to be a professional. And I'm really thankful for those experiences.
The speed from the MLL, the speed from Syracuse to the MLL, was it double? Was it that much faster?
It really was. I mean, just the speed of the game, the less, minutia of coaching. It was just playing. And the 2-point arc really is different for the goalies. I mean, it's a not only obviously a swing in the game, it's a swing emotionally. When you give up a 2-point shot, it used to be 16 yards. Now it's 13 yards in the sixes. I mean, that emotionally is a game changer, and how mentally tough that was really difficult for me as a transition, because, you're up by one and all of a sudden you're losing. And that was a really difficult transition for me as a goaltender to see how important that shot was. So, between years 1 and 3, that was my biggest growth.
MLL to the PLL. You spent, I think, 3 years there.
3 years. Gosh, 3 years. Yep.
The different model than what obviously was in the MLL. And now they're trying to take it to the next level. The sixes just played, which is obviously the Olympic version. And we actually think we're going to make JV here in Michigan go to sixes. And the reason is that we had 159 JV teams 4 years ago before the pandemic. We're back to about 50 teams. So high school teams will have 35 to 40 kids, and it's not enough to make two teams. So the sixes make it a simple process of not having to worry about field it and still get kids to play. And it was such a divided conversation we've had here. Sixes, to me, I thought it was going to be horrible. Then I see it, and it's like, my God, it's unbelievable. But it also changed the trajectory of the game, because now you can be the best attack in the world. If you can't play defense, you ain't going to play in the Olympics. So it now highlights a different guy, from that standpoint. So when you go into the PLL and it's more of a traveling circus than it is you're playing for your town. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you started with Rochester out of college. Now you're going from town to town. That had to be a different experience for you as a player.
It was great. And I thought the PLL did a great job of taking care of the players and making them feel important. And the events were just that. They were events, not just games. But it is different, and it's a transition but again, that was at the tail end of my career. So for me, it was, hey, we want to win. And it was a lot of the foundation of who I've been playing with in Rochester anyways. And the locker room is so important, and the coaching staff is so important. And I had the same coaching staff and locker room my entirety of my MLL and PLL career. So for me, there was some stability, there was some maturity within how we try to act. And it was a great experience to be a part of something new. I was going to retire after 2018 when the MLL was completed, because that was Team USA that summer. And I thought, okay, this is a good, put a bow on it. But you wanted to be a part of something new and something that was growing the game.
One question I've asked all of the guys who played for the national team: you play for Syracuse, you play for these different MLL and PLL teams. Now you're pulling on the Stars and Stripes. And I have to ask the question because everybody's got a different answer. But what was that feeling like for you?
The greatest accomplishment I've ever had as a player, to be a part of that, to be a part of the process. I mean, I got cut on the last day in 2014, so I was an alternate when I thought I was playing my best. And then you have to wait 4 years. And I think that's the caveat people don't think about, is like, there's not many years you're in your prime. And, that is such a checkbox that you want to have. And then you get there, and then it's okay, well, now you have one chance, you better win. So now the nerves of that game against Canada, the emotions, the tension, I can't quite describe it. You're in Israel. It was just a really unique experience for me as a player. To be voted captain with Matanowski by my peers was the single greatest accomplishment I've ever had as an athlete. I will say that, above the championships, above the individual awards, that to me was the greatest accomplishment, because you're playing, with 22 of the best players in the world, and you're trying to do the best by leading as you can. And to do that with Matt was a memory I'll have for the rest of my life.
And the project that they have in Israel has really done wonders for the national program there. You don't think of typically of playing lacrosse in Israel, but there's a lot of American guys that are over there working and stuff for the project over there. We've had a couple of interviews with those guys there. It's an amazing program to get guys to play both on the male and the female side. So that's kind of cool. Yeah. So let me take it back to Jacksonville. So you have this lunch, you decide you're going to be a coach. You go to Duke, if I'm not mistaken, as a grad assistant.
Volunteer, yep.
Volunteer coach. You're with John for a year. Then you go to Providence for 4 years. That's the first paying gig. And at that time, when you go to Providence, you're what, 24, 25?
23. It was that summer. So I was 22 at Duke and turned 23. And then Coach Gabrielli, who was the defensive coordinator at Duke, got the head coaching job at Providence and brought me along with him to be his defensive coordinator at 23. And I was learning on the fly.
So when you start out as a goalie, do you look at offense or defense? Obviously, goalie's a defensive position, but a lot of good offensive coordinators around the country have been goalies, because you know what they do from the other side, but you don't necessarily understand it. So when you're deciding what you decide you want to coach, well, how do you come up with that sort of decision?
Well, I was fortunate to be an understudy for everybody at Duke. That's the beauty of being a volunteer, is you get to learn everything. And often when you're with the defense as a volunteer, you're running the scout offense. So you are learning sets and spacing and concepts. So I had a brief knowledge, but I was still young. And We hired a guy in Brett Holm, who's now the offense coordinator at Brown, who was, had the tough style of play, and he brought that offensive acumen to the coaching office, which I learned a ton from that as well as an understudy to him. But then to be able to learn the defense under Coach Gabbs, who had done it at the ACC level, I was kind of learning from every angle in our office. And that was a lot of cool years at Providence where we were working with a lot of different challenges and finding ways to win, and learned a lot about how to get the most out of your players, which was an amazing experience.
So how does Jacksonville come in the picture?
Yes, I had no intentions to be moving on. I had a really good experience at Providence. We had an amazing defense that year. We had Jared Newman, who's in the PLL, Tate Boyce in the goal, James Barclay, who's in the PLL. I mean, we had a good team. And we were excited about that. And I got a call from our athletic director after our conference tournament, and just figured to at least have the head coaching experience, to go down there and learn a little bit more, and fell in love. I fell in love with the athletic director. I fell in love with the president, the support of the men's lacrosse program, the vision. This is a place that's unique, and I felt like that's what I wanted. I wanted something different. I didn't want a traditional hotbed university. I wanted to have the experience of a Denver or a team like Utah, a team outside of the normal bubble, where you could bring in kids that wanted to do something different and have a little bit of a splash based on how we could operate. So that's what we've done. And we had a vision, and now it's starting to come to fruition. Third coach, Matt Kerwick, who was at Georgetown and Cornell and Hobart, and he was here. He started the program.
Okay.
And then Guy Van Arsdale, who had been,
that's right,
was around at a few different spots, is now at Kobe. He was a second coach, and then I came in as the third coach now for the program.
So how long have they had a team? You've been there
2010.
6. Okay. All right.
Yeah. 2010 it started. 2012 was the inaugural season. 11 or 12.
Okay. That 8, 9, 7 or 8 or 9 in that year, 2007, 8 or 9, we started to hear about the Florida Southerns, started to hear about Jacksonville, some of the places, and the guys wanted to go play warm weather, and they can't get a better place than to go from that. Now, Jacksonville's got an unbelievably rich athletic history. We were joking about the first time 2 7-footers actually started on a college basketball team were Pembroke Burroughs and Artis Gilmore. And for those who are not old enough to remember, Jacksonville they had a guy on that team named Monty Tao. They had a 6'8" guard and 2 7-foot forwards, and Monty Tao was 5'6". And what nobody knew about Monty Tao was he was a little bit like Muggsy Bogues. He could dunk the basketball at 5'6". So he was playing Division I basketball because he was an athlete. And if you're 5'6" and can dunk a basketball, you're an athlete.
No doubt.
But the education at Jacksonville sometimes gets lost in the translation because they think, well, it's a Florida school. You guys have an unbelievable liberal arts school.
We do, and we've established these niche programs that have been game changing for recruiting. And the first question I asked in my interview was, "Tell me about the business school." And now we have the Davis College of Business and Technology, which for us is 65% of our roster. Well, now we have a law school. Now we're actually just opened up a medical school. So now these programs are opening up where we can not only keep our guys undergrad, but they have the opportunity to pursue postgraduate options as well. So those programs, along with the liberal arts institution, have opened up what we've been able to do in terms of recruiting.
You've raised about $1.8 million to build a wonderful facility for your program next to the stadium. You also do a lot of charitable work within the Jacksonville area with high schools and having them play before and other kinds of events. Is that sort of bringing Central New York back to Northern Florida?
We're trying. The analogy we use all the time with our president is, our president's from Syracuse, and we talk about all the time. When you grew up, you saw kids walking around in Syracuse lacrosse t-shirts. Our job now is to have kids walking around in Jacksonville lacrosse t-shirts. And I think we've been very intentional of making sure that they have full access. We don't have a lot of red tape at our university, which I think is the coolest part. We invite people. Our open practices, coaching clinics that are free, youth clinics. We host a lot of youth groups on our field to be able to host their events because we're the lacrosse only field. We don't have to compete with a lot of other sports for space. We have high school games play at JU. Those are the little things we've been able to do to just make North Florida lacrosse more of a community versus, hey, here's a Division I program and then here's everybody else. I have a personal relationship with nearly every high school coach in the area. And that's kind of allowed us to really grow and brand ourselves as North Florida's team versus, say, Jacksonville University.
That's pretty extraordinary, though, to have that kind of access to a Division I coach. You realize that, don't you?
I will say people give me a side eye all the time when they hear some of the things we do. For example, we do something called the Coach's Corner, which right before the game, an hour and 15 minutes before the game, anybody who donates a certain amount, which is not that much, it has access into our film room, and I walk them through the entire game plan. I walk them through the personnel, the matchups, the strategy, the schematics. My thought is, and this is something I stole from Coach Danowski years ago, if the fans and the players or the parents and our alumni know what to look for, then they're going to be better fans. And if they're just yelling and screaming and saying wheeled or, why aren't you covering this guy or why are you doing this? Well, then, we're doing a disservice of education. So we tell them everything that we're doing. We tell them calls. Hey, look for this. We're an open book. I mean, shoot, most of our ideas are stolen, and our job is to make sure that the game is growing. And that's one of the ways that we do that.
The last 6 years I've coached the high school team in Ann Arbor in vision of a stadium. Now I'm a Spartan, so you have to understand that I'm making this comment about Wolverines. So I say that as the partial understanding. But we try to get some of the high schools in Ann Arbor to play in the new stadium in Ann Arbor, and we're basically told it's off limits. Well, nothing against it, but if we're neighbors and you want us to work your end lines and do some of the other kinds of things, then maybe being a little more friendly might be a little more helpful. And that's why I say extraordinary, because some places it is like that and some places it isn't, but it is what it is. How much does the weather help you recruit kids to come to Southern Florida?
I think it's a cherry on top. I think, certainly in the back of guys' minds when they come to a practice in January at 70 degrees and they think about what they're going back home to, it probably sits in the back of their mind. But, we talk about it at the end of the process. I do think it's a bonus. I think when kids get here, they realize the advantage we have. I mean, we're going to play at St. John's this coming Saturday, and it's going to be 30 and snow. And I think our guys don't even realize that because they've been practicing in 80-degree weather. So it's certainly a benefit, I think, for us. The ability just to be out there all the time. I mean, our guys are on the field all the time. It's the beauty of having the facility next to the field and having the weather that we have. Our guys shoot all the time. I mean, working hard here is cool. And I think the weather plays a huge part of that.
You take the pandemic out of your 6 years, you can see the success every year. It gets better and it gets better. And you're now one of those programs. But you've had some extraordinary wins. Denver last year. This year, you had a couple of, upsets. I don't think the lacrosse world looks at it as an upset. I think they just know you're a good team. Are you surprised when people are surprised when you beat somebody at that level? Because we know how good you are.
Yeah. I think the growth that I saw this year that was really cool for us as a program is when we beat Duke last year. That was a monumental win. I don't sugarcoat that. I don't play it down. I mean, that took a long time to do. When we beat Duke this year, there was a lot less interview requests. There was a lot less hoopla about it. And that's good. That's good. That means that there's a little bit of hey, these guys aren't a one-hit wonder. And these guys are developing something culturally, not just, year by year. And I said that in the beginning of the season, the 2022 season was a heck of a year. We were 14-3, significant, monumental wins. But that team doesn't exist anymore. That team is gone. That team has graduated, moved on. It's in a record book. But programs are sustainable. Programs and culture can live beyond just one game or one season. And that's what we've been trying to build here for the last 6 years. And again, credit to the guys who are on our team right now that came with no facility, very little scholarships, a shared kind of rundown football field, limited resources. Now that we have everything, kids are starting to see the fruits of our success, but there's a lot of blind trust in our fifth-year seniors who are carrying a lot of our weight right now.
Well, I think of you and I think of John Torpy at High Point, those kinds of programs that are starting to, get up in that top 10, top 15. It only helps the sport because they're not named universities that any kid would have known 5 years ago. And now, if you're obviously in northern Florida, you know what Jacksonville is, but you might not if you're from Wisconsin. And now you know that that's just part of the landscape, and that only helps the sport because, again, it leaves the regionalism out of it and it develops, much more of a national flavor. Utah, of all places, has got to come to Detroit in a couple of weeks to play UDM. And part of that discussion is they're leaving maybe the best view of a stadium in the country than a lot of places, I can't think of many more places that have a better view than that. Even Denver faces east, so from that perspective, it changes the landscape. But I think the growth of the sport is again, dependent on two young coaches that have done, extraordinary kinds of things. Talk briefly about the ASUN. You've gone from Southern Conference to now the ASUN, and sort of that transition. Do you look for different players? What's your thoughts on the league? And it's a unique league because the top of the ASUN is as good as anything there is in the country. And then you got some teams that are new and some teams that have come from different conferences. So talk a little bit about the conference.
Yeah, I really see it as not much different than the experience our guys have had in the Southern Conference. And the reason why is a lot of teams are the same. I mean, we used to have Air Force in the Southern Conference. We used to play Detroit in the MAC. Now, Mercer has always been an opponent of ours. Bellarmine's have been an opponent of ours. And because of the uniqueness of our schedule, a lot of the teams that are in the conference are teams that we would play against because of the travel challenges. Utah always needed somebody to travel to. So did we. So we always partnered up. So these are teams that we're pretty familiar with. So it's not going to change much in what we do. I think the rivalries are still going to exist. Air Force, Robert Morris, Utah, now Detroit, Cleveland State, Bellarmine, Mercer. I mean, those have always existed. And then now we have a home for new programs like a Lindenwood or a Queens. And I know the struggles that they have of scheduling and trying to find opponents and teams willing to travel to Missouri to go play. So I'm glad that we have a home for all of them. And it's going to be an incredibly competitive conference as years go on. It's going to be a lot of recruiting against one another because of where we're located. And anytime you have 10 teams in a conference, there's going to be a top and a bottom, perspective wise. But I think that you're going to see Queens and Lindenwood grow at a rapid pace because now they have a home and they have beautiful institutions and there's enough players to go around.
I think I'm fairly knowledgeable about lacrosse. And when we were started to talk about the ASUN this year for some of the interviews, I didn't imagine that I knew another team in New York. And I'm talking to Chris Cullen, who's the head coach at UD, and he says, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, Queens, New York." No, stupid. It's down. But my point is, again, I think I'm a fairly knowledgeable lacrosse guy, and I didn't realize that Queens, from the Carolinas was part of that discussion. So again, that becomes a better opportunity because they play in a very unique stadium too. There's an old Civil War building or some kind of that's right next to the field, which gives it character. It's kind of a cool. We've only seen it on TV, but it's. Do you have to recruit a better player to play in the ASUN than you did in the Southern Conference?
No, and the analogy we always use is, we want to be a top 20 team. We have to recruit against top 20 teams. That's our bar. And if that's Utah and Air Force, absolutely. If that's Duke and North Carolina, absolutely. But, I'd never really, the conference is important. I think I had a unique experience at Syracuse where we were independent for 2 years and then we kind of transitioned into the Big East, but I never saw conference alignment as important other than the AQ. The AQ is crucial. But besides that, our job is to field the best team and try to get in the top 20. And to do that, you have to recruit the best players. And that might be against a Duke, which, we're not going to win that battle very often. I get that. It might be against an Air Force. I think they do a hell of a job. But you're recruiting against small privates, large state schools. You got to get the kid that wants to come to Jacksonville. And that's where we live, is the guys that want to be here, because that's hard. And we got kids from far from home, 22 different states, 2 different provinces. How do we get kids to come here and stay here, want to be a part of our culture? So, sometimes it's a different type of young man that would go to a high point. So that's our challenge. And the recruiting is just such a fun process too, making sure you kind of get the right fit.
You have to remind yourself from time to time that you're in your mid-30s.
Yeah, shoot. I'm still, referees remind me all the time, like, "John, you're not a player anymore," because I get a little edgy as a coach. But, I think, it's for me, it's amazing how fast this process has gone. I think about when I was 27 and got this job, how little I knew. And I can't wait for 6 years from now to look back and say, man, how little did I know when I was 33? And those are the cool kind of growing pains that you get as a young coach who's figuring it out on the fly, but getting incredible support from administration and the people around us.
When I've had a chance to talk to Bill and Bill Tierney and John Danowski and some of the older guys, there's always that discussion of older guys saying, we hope the younger generation comes, but your success at the age you are, that was my point of the question at 30s. I know you reflect on today, but if you maybe mom and dad has taken the time to reflect on, wow, this has been your rise to stardom, if you will, or certainly success is really unparalleled as a player, as a level of coach. And that was kind of my point. Do you enjoy, can you slow down long enough at your age to enjoy the ride? Is I guess the point. Because as we get older, I'll be 70 coming up this summer, and I'm still coaching. This is my 50th year. My point is I take a lot more time to look at the road than I did when I was 40 because I was still screaming at referees 35 years ago. And that's kind of my point. Do you take the time?
I do. I think I learned a lot from Coach Janowski in that this doesn't need to be, hey, you got to work, 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 work. I say to our guys all the time, like the Duke win, it's okay to enjoy this. It's okay to be addicted to this. I think that's good. I don't think that's arrogant. I think we work so stinking hard all year long. Our guys are, we're going to be out there. It's going to be 85 degrees today. We got a game tomorrow. We got to work. We got stuff to fix. So when you win, you only get 15 of these a year. So that means I used the analogy the other day, you have 15 games, let's say on a good year. Well, that's 2 hours of game time. So it's 30 hours. So out of 365 days, you play for about 30 hours. You better enjoy the hell out of it if you find success. And I think for us, that analogy has helped our guys understand why we do what we do and enjoy it for a little bit period of time and understand that the work has to come, but we just don't get enough opportunities to just say, hey, on to the next one. No, there is reflection. There's also a sense of hunger too. I appreciate all the kind words you said, but we haven't got to the NCAA tournament. We haven't gotten to the Final Four. There's goals on our walls that have not been achieved. So for me, I find the joy and the success. I also find the hunger in what we haven't achieved yet as well.
Okay, that's a great answer. Last couple questions, and the one I haven't had a chance to try it out this year, but it's a coach. You're recruiting. You get two choices: athleticism or IQ. if that's the barrier between that kid and another kid, which direction do you go?
That's a great question. We've challenged ourselves with this. I think in the past, I've always said athleticism. It's always been my answer. But we have a couple young men in our program right now that aren't the strongest guys, didn't crush the fitness tests. Those the guys that are playing right now as freshmen. They know the game. They see it 2 plays ahead. They anticipate. So I think it's probably by position. Like if you're talking about a D midi, yeah, we're going to choose athleticism. We'll teach the rest. If you're talking about an attackman, probably the IQ. But the way that we kind of grade is the 4 S's. You have size, speed, skill, and smart. And if you have 3, you're good to go. If you have 2, we got to really evaluate. If you have 4, we're probably not going to be able to get you. But you can't just have 1. You can't just have size. But you're not very skilled. You're not very smart. You're not very fast. You have to have at least 2 to get in the door. 3 probably is somebody that we want to move forward with right away. So that's kind of how we grade and how we try to evaluate.
It's been interesting answers to that question because the follow-up to it is if somebody says, well, one or the other, there's no medical science device that I'm aware of that measures the size of a heart. Mm-hmm. And there's been plenty of those stories. And it's, the kid who'd, knock it off the shoulder, kind of, knock the rock off the shoulder approach to things. So from that standpoint, listen, I appreciate your time and we wish you the best of luck. I think you would DM plays you down there.
Yeah. We have them down here. I'm looking forward to having Coach Cullen back.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, John, I appreciate the time that you spent with us and best of luck the rest of the season for sure.
I thank you, Greg. Thanks for taking the time and all that you do.